Good afternoon. We're going to be looking at Psalm 66 today. Well, today we have a Thanksgiving psalm. We have a little bit of a change between the verses of the psalm. Psalm 66, 1 through 7, deals with the thanksgiving of the individual. Some ideas here. These psalms express a profound awareness of deep gratitude for God's abundant blessings, whether individual or national. So the individual, things we can expect, the form, an expanded introduction declaring the intention to thank God, narration of the trouble, usually to the guests of the celebration. His trouble, his calling upon God, his deliverance. That acknowledgement, proclamation of Yahweh's deliverance, usually directed towards others. In many cases, the psalm ends with an announcement of the thank-off. So, it closes verses 6 through 12, or 8 through 12. Thanksgiving of the community. These psalms are parallel in form to the individual Thanksgiving psalms. The life setting for these psalms was likely a cultic celebration of the temple in remembrance of God's help and intervention. So, in other words, most likely this psalm was used in temple practice. The individual starting it with the idea that the entire congregation would join in with that praise. Let's read what Luther has to say about Psalm 66. The 66th Psalm is a psalm of thanks for the general blessing that God often delivers and protects his people out of the hand of the enemies, as he did at the Red Sea. The histories in the books of the Judges and Kings are full of these deliverances, which he also does daily for us, delivering and keeping his own in the true faith against the devil, spirits, and sins. Excuse my yawn. So let's begin with the first few verses, get a sense of who this is. So, to the choir master, a song, a psalm. And we have here no title talking about who wrote the psalm or why, which the why is not terribly consistent, but excuse me. Okay. Song 46, intro. Okay, so we have this little thing here. It says song of complete trust in God as a strong refuge, particularly in the face of crisis. A song suggests vocal arrangement without instrumental accompaniment. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So, a mizmor, so we have lam nas lamnasea, seer, mizmor. Um, so seer would be the word for song, and then mizmor is a really typical word for psalm, not song. To the chief musician is also a very common uh, beginning or title. So let's look at this word seer just for a moment, just to see if it's backing up what the a singer song. Yeah. So sometimes the songs will talk about, this one's to the gittith, this one's to the to. There's another couple of instruments that I think one of them was like a gaff. So there's a couple of instruments that psalms are told that they're attributed to, or I should say, um, what we think is that individual instruments might have had a style, a meter, perhaps a kind of a sound, and so we would, like like right now, well, not so much right now, but 100 years ago, if you'd have said something like a jig or a waltz, if you would have said a ballad or a march, right? All these things conjure up not only, well, they conjure up several things. A style, like, in other words, how you would expect it to sound. A march is going to sound very different from a jig, for example. And then also, they would conjure up the idea of meter. So a jig would typically be in 3/4 or 6/8 mixed meter, whereas a march would be in 4/4. A ballad is often in 4/4, but a different kind of 4/4. In other words, a ballad would be like a straight, or a pastoral, right? It would be kind of straight 4/4, whereas a march would be like a 2/2, would be like a marching beat kind of thing, right? So the the title seer tells us something. It tells us that this is a vocal led song, and there would be limitations to what a voice or a group of voices could do, right? A group of voices can't give you the kind of maybe rhythmic pyrotechnics that like a guitar or a lyre might be able to. So we don't know exactly what this means, but we have at least kind of an idea of perhaps what the accompaniment or the sound underneath the poetry sounded like. That's what this would be for. Granted, if you were part of the culture, you know, 2,000 years ago or longer, you would have a better idea of what a seer would be than we do. So we begin with verse 1 then. After the to the chief musician, a song, a psalm, we begin with the actual poetic matter. Hari'u Elohim kal haaretz. Um, make a joyful noise to God. Elohim is God. You probably remember that one. Kal would be all. Haaretz. Aretz is a word for earth, but usually like Hadamah, Ha'adamah is usually like, because Adam was formed out of the dust. So when you talk about like putting up handfuls of soil in your hands, that would be Adam. Whereas Aretz usually is kind of referring to this idea of land. Aretz is often kind of tied up with the idea of goyim as well, nations, right? So this is not the dust of the earth proclaiming to God, although it can, but this is actually um, the totality of the earth, the land, crying out to God in joy, right? Not necessarily in lament here. Verse 2. Zameru kavod semo si mu kavod uh, tehilato. Um, sing out the honor, kavod. So kavod, glory, is often something that's kind of tied up with the Ark of the Covenant, the glory of God in the tabernacle, in a pillar of fire or a pillar of smoke. So it's The kavod Yahweh is this glory of Yahweh that men aren't really allowed to see in totality. We kind of just see the outside edges. Like we see the fire and brimstone on Exodus. We see the glowing white of Jesus at the Transfiguration, but we don't really ever see it. The wholeness of it. In fact, Moses has to, you know, cover his face because the kavod Yahweh that somehow his face has taken up in his so Moses has seen God, right? He's seeing God, in some way. We would probably understand this maybe the way that Moses could see God and live was maybe he's seeing Christ, like a transfiguration style pre-incarnate Christ. And when he comes down then off the mountain, his face shines so brightly because of what he's seen. And he's been in the presence of God that it's almost unbearable to the people. So he has to veil his own face. So make a sing out, Zamara'u, sing out the honor, the kavod of his name, right? Samo, what does this word come from? Shame. I thought it was, so I just want to make sure. So shame would be a name. So Samo is just a name plus. You put it on the end for the u, Samu. Simu. So we have this. Here's perhaps here's a place where the author is kind of making some wordplay. And you know what? I don't know. You mind if I move the camera and show you it on the screen? I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see it, and then I want to kind of point at it as I'm showing it to you. It's interesting. Okay. So excuse me. Just bear with me here. Okay. So now, I got to back up a little bit. There we go. I'm going to hold the camera with one hand. I'm going to show you. I really need to learn how to use my OBS. So we have kavod here, and we have kavod here, right? They're the same kavod. And then we have samo, simu. Samo, simu. So the words definitely, this is one of those few places where the Hebrew writer is making a little bit of a josh, sorry, I'm going to hold it still, on the words sounding the same. Samo, simu. Kavod. So you see this like inside out structure, and then interestingly enough, sing out and his praise make a lot of sense, right? So sing out the honor of his name. Simu, make glorious his praise. So maybe that's talking about the idea of making your glory, your praise glorious. And how do we do that? With we would endow our praise with sincerity, with faith, with love, affection towards our Father, right? I'm a little curious. I just wanted to show you how that was structured. I'm going to put the camera back now so you can see me. And we will soldier on. Okay. Just adjust that down a little bit. I want to see how the ESV translates this verse 2. Sing the glory of his name. Yeah, the kavod, the glory of his name. That makes sense. Give to him glorious praise. So basically, it's the same phrase twice, but said differently, kind of inside out, right? I think there's a word for this. We would call it a synecdoche. I'll look that up just to make sure that I've got that right. It's been a long time. No, maybe I'm thinking of a hendiasis. Yeah, I think hendiasis is what I'm actually looking for. It doesn't matter. You can see the structure of the verses there, then it makes sense. Going on to verse 3, not to bore you. Okay. Imru Elohim. No, I'm sorry. Lelohim, which is just a version of Elohim. Ma Nora Ma'aseka Berov Utseka Yekahasu Leka Oyabeka. Okay, so say to God. The two is the Lelohim. So say to God, how awesome are your works. Let's look these two words up, right? The awesome word. I want to see what that's getting at here. To fear, absolute, stand in awe of, reverence, honor, as we get a sense of this word. Makes sense here, right? So how awe-inducing, how kind of large, and maybe in a sense like anxiety-producing because they're so big, right? But the kind of the how words evolve, right? So at one point, God is so big, he's so large, he kind of he's like almost borderline scary, fear-inducing. But then we can understand how that would come to be this idea of being awesome, awe-inducing, right? He's so big. So how awe-inducing are your works? Um, this comes from ma'asa, which is a deed or a work. Comes from the asa verb, which is to do or to make. So this is basically like a noun form of the verb for to work or to do or to make, right? So a work. So how awesome are your works? And well, let's finish the verse and then come back and talk about that just for a second. Through the greatness of your power, like something like to the effect of the greatness of your power. Peel would be. I don't think Peel is causative. Your enemies will submit themselves to you, something like that. Let's see what ESV has here. So great is your power that your enemies come cringing to you. Yeah, that makes sense. So your enemies come to submit themselves to you, right? So just an idea here. Remember that when we get into Old Testament and we're talking about the Psalms specifically, the Psalms reflect on the Gospels, or I should say, excuse me, on the Pentateuch, very much like the epistles of the New Testament reflect on the Gospel. When Paul will talk about God's work, either for you or God's work in creation, Paul refers to Christ and the miracles of Christ, the things that Christ did. The Psalms, and to a lesser extent, the Proverbs and other Old Testament books do the same thing, but they refer to the gospel of the Old Testament, which is the book of Exodus. So the lion's share of the works of the Lord you're going to find in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus. There are some that exist outside of it, like in Joshua, the conquest. Sometimes the Psalms might refer to like something like Jericho or something like that. And then there are times where the Psalms will refer to things that happened during the Judges, the mighty victories of the judges in the book of Judges. But this is primarily where these kind of gospel things come from, or the prophets will prophesy about future things that are to come, right? Reflect on the things that God has done, or look forward to the things that He will do, right? So the mighty works of God. I mean, we could talk about manna in the desert. We could talk about water from the rocks. Several places where that happened. We could talk about the plagues against the Egyptians, and then of course we have to talk about the Passover and also the Red Sea crossing. Right? These are, and that's not definitive. There's still other things that God did for His people, right? So when you hear this idea of like how awesome are the works of the Lord, I think primarily we would think about if we're gonna lock ourselves into an idea of that we're reading the psalm in the immediate context it was given, right? So in other words, an Israelite praying this psalm in 1000 BCE, let's say, for example, 1,000 years before Christ, like well, let's even go back for like maybe 2500 BC or something like that, before the exile, right? Before going into Babylon and coming back, right? So just, they've lived in the promised land for a very long time, post David, post Solomon, or during the time of Solomon or the kings, right? They would read this, and when it talks about the works of the Lord, they would be focusing on Exodus, things that happened in the Pentateuch, and then possibly the things that happened in Joshua. But I think that we can read this and understand that how awesome are your works, O Lord. Well, I mean, we could also read in not just those things, but also the incarnation. We could read in Christ's miracles. I mean, you could literally say the first part of verse 3 straight to Christ. You could walk right up to Christ and just say, God, how awesome are your works. I mean, this the disciples could have responded with this psalm when Jesus stilled the waves and the storm on the Sea of Galilee, right? When the storm stops and they're saved, they could just say, "How awesome are your works, O God," right? And it would have been correct. So just an idea of like how we could read this. We can kind of see it in two different ways at the same time. And then if we want to look even further, we could think about, well, what if Jesus is or was saying this psalm, which we can do with any of the psalms. We should always understand the psalms. We can always understand them in the voice of Christ, right? So what how awesome are your works, oh God? Well, I mean, we could look towards what God has done through His Son and what God does for His Son, right? I've glorified it. I will glorify it again. And some scriptures talk about the Father raising Christ on the third day. You can kind of talk about that, I mean, and maybe if you're talking the voice of Christ, you're talking even about works that haven't happened yet. So what is the Father going to do after the, so the judgment work is primarily Jesus's and the angels coming, appearing, judging, taking the devil, his evil angels and evil people and depositing them in the lake of fire, never to be seen from again. Right. This is the work of the angels, and it is the leadership of Christ. But then creating a new heavens and new earth, creating a place for us, mansions in places above. I mean, that is the work of the Father. I mean, he's the creator. So Christ could be even looking forward and talking about how awesome are your works, O Lord, the works of redemption and rebuilding, of renewal and resurrection. So going on, verse 4, Kal haaretz Yistaha'u laka ve vetzameru, I think. La'ach yetzameru simka selah. That's a lot before. Selah is just kind of a musical notation word. We're not really sure what it means. We think it might be some kind of clue towards there's like a refrain that would have been sung or something. We're not 100% sure, but it's that kind of thing. So probably not something that we should necessarily worry about in terms of meaning, more in terms of structure, like how is the psalm structured and what's it trying to do. So let's work with the first part here. All the earth, Yistaharu, shall worship you. Okay, let's take a look at this word to bow down. Yeah, and then from this we get prostrating. We get the idea of worshiping, which makes sense. It's very common in the Old Testament to do this. So all the earth, every knee shall bow, right? Every person will bow down before you and worship you, right? And sing praises to you. I think we actually just had this word, samar. We had it. Let's see here. I think up. Yeah, the first word in verse 2, I believe, is the same word here. Yeah, it's from samar, which is to make music, to praise God. Okay. So all the earth will worship you and sing praises to you. Again, Zamar here again. They shall sing praises to your name. So what's the difference here? Sing praises to you, sing praises to your name. I think one would be a personal idea and one would be the like objective idea or not idea, objective character explanation of. So the idea that like I think the first one is all the earth will worship you and sing praises to you. So like literally the world will stand before God, we'll worship him, we'll praise him. We're engaged in an action that's basically at its fundamental core two things: God and us, and the direction is to him from us, right? So there's more people than just two, but all of us kind of count as one consecutive whole, and God is one. And it's this relationship idea then, right? So everything is going to turn towards you and worship you and praise you. But I think then to sing praises to God's name, God mentions, in the Old Testament, like in Exodus, or probably more correctly, Numbers. This idea that where God's name dwells, his character dwells, his ways dwell, like how he is honorable, just and trustworthy and true, right? Like he doesn't do things willy-nilly. He makes promises, he keeps them, he's consistent, right? This is who God is. And then of course like the ones that matter, well, I mean they all matter, but these ones matter especially. He loves you, he has grace for you, he gives you mercy instead of punishment. This is God's character, i.e. his name. His name describes his character. That's how God names himself. He says, I am who I am. And then he says, the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, excuse me, I flipped them around. And what he means by that is that you'll know me by what I do. You'll know me by the promises that I make and the promises that I keep. And by extension, then too, we can think a little bit about that. Abraham has his foibles. Isaac has his foibles. Jacob definitely has his foibles. They're not perfect people. God keeps his promises to them. He makes promises. He keeps promises. He loves them despite who they are, right? So when God mentions these three people in that same conversation of I am who I am, what he's trying to tell us is I'm everything that I've done. I'm my character. You don't have to have a name for me that I live up to. Rather, my name is literally what I do, how I serve you, right? Um, so all the earth will worship and sing praises to God. We'll kind of engage in this relationship between one another, and then God's people will in turn sing praises about his character, his name, what he's done, which is very consistent with what we do on Sunday morning. Yeah, I think Sunday morning is that's why I brought it up this way. I think it is a relationship between us and God. We're first of all, he's doing the lion's share of the work, right? So he's feeding us, he's loving us, he's giving us good things, and then we in turn are praising him and singing. But also, kind of the idea of like a closing hymn, or the idea of like a Te Deum, right? And not all closing hymns do this, but a lot of them do. And usually we walk out singing a closing hymn. Sometimes I think the idea is that we should literally walk out as we sing it. As we leave this place, we would worship him and not just it be between him and us, but then like the psalmist saying the second part, now we actually tell the whole world of his glory, about his name, his character. So going on, we're going to try to get through 7 today, so we'll go a little quicker here. Leku, Ureu, Mipalot, Elohim, Norah, Aliha, Alila, all Bene Adam. Okay. Come and see. Yara is to see, so this is a version of it. Ureu, it's a version of it. And see, come and see the works of God. Now, my one question would be, we had works before. Let's see if those words match up. Your works are awesome, so that is not the same as before. This word comes from the Hebrew, basically verb for working or to do or to make, right? So it's a noun version of that verb. And then we get back to the psalm here. Now the second word is mipalot. This comes from a work, something made. So this is not related to the other verb, but it comes from the Hebrew word for pa'al, to do or to make. So we have two different words that are doing primarily the same thing. So these words are not the same, but they're in the same. We would probably say they're in the same entomological field. They're talking about the same kind of stuff, right? So come and see the works of God. Verse 5 sounds a lot like, enter. Jesus says this in one of his parables. We actually just talked about it on last Sunday. And he's the parable of talents, where he gives 3 separate people 3 different amounts. And then he says this at the end here. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. That last part here. And I can't help but think of verse 5. Come and see the works of God. So it feels like we're almost shifting towards, oh, no, it's not. Look at verse 6. Yeah, he turned the sea into dry land. Through the river they went on foot. So yeah, it's like the psalmist is inviting people to kind of take a moment and meditate on the works of the Lord, the things that he's done. Right? So come and see them. Come see these things. It's funny, I was talking about this in confirmation last night. We had our confirmation students, and I just kind of mentioned that I kind of lost my train of thought here, what I was going to say. Well, we'll leave it there. Sorry about that. I lost my train of thought. So, kind of an invitation to come and see the amazing things, to meditate on God's word, what He's done, the amazing things He's done, right? And then He is awesome in His doings toward the sons of men. Let's see what ESV has real quick. Come and see what God has done. Pretty straightforward. He is awesome in His deeds toward the children of man. Yeah, so His doings, His deeds toward the sons of men. Yeah. I think there's a reason why they say sons of men. God does have other people that He is God over, or not other people. God has other creatures, let's say, that He has dominion over. And, see, this is not a secret. God rules over the angels, the holy, heavenly, good angels that amongst the rebellion of the devil, they stayed true and worshiped God. These things are before our time. Quite frankly, they're maybe above our pay grade, like trying to understand exactly what's going on. Suffice to say, they serve God night and day, right, as the scriptures tell us. And also, we have guardian angels that serve and protect us, right? So there's angels that minister to God. There's angels that minister to us. And I don't think, what I mean to say is, I don't think this is special in terms of that we're better than them in this respect. In actuality, we're lower, that we sin against God and angels serve Him perfectly, right? So I think what this verse is trying to say is, He is awesome in his He is awesome in His deeds toward the sons of men. I think the question would be, do the sons of men, sinful men, i.e., do human people deserve awesome deeds? And the answer would be no, they don't. Do angels? Perhaps, because they serve Him perfectly. I really can't answer. I'm not saying the angels don't deserve it, I just don't know. But the idea being here is that the psalmist delineates a difference, right? That the sons of men, sinful men, see the awesome deeds of God and they don't deserve them. And this is a reason for us to praise, that God gives us things we don't deserve. And then there are things that we do deserve, i.e., punishment, and He doesn't give us that, right? So that'll be your little. You can thumbnail that and put it away, right? Mercy is when God doesn't give you what you deserve. Grace is when God gives you what you don't deserve. They're different. So anyway, it's definitely, verse 5 is an invitation for us to meditate on these works, and I think it's also commenting on just the fact that we don't deserve them, but God gives them to us anyway. Verse 6. Now we get into a very specific discussion about these works that God has done. He turned Hapak Yam Layabasa Banahar Yaabru Beragel Shem Nismaha Bo. He turned Yam, the sea, into dry land. Layabasa. Let's look this one up just to get a sense of where this word is coming from. It's kind of an interesting idea. How do they comes from yabesh, and yabesh is to be dried up or to withered. That makes sense, right? So we get back to yabasha, dry land, dry ground. This would be a fun word to study. I'm telling you. because pretty much every time this word is used, it's used in relation to Exodus, except for prior to Exodus. And there's three references to that. This is kind of fun. So it looks like there's only what, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 occurrences in the entire Old Testament of this word, which when you think about it is meaningful. Like, I know you're wondering, like, well, why does that matter, Pastor? Well, if a word's only used a few times in the Old Testament, like every time you write, you have an ability to choose words. What words you choose gives away thought process. So sometimes like translation can be helpful because you can get a sense of the psalmist or the writer, what they're getting across. Sometimes words can tell us something just about God and the scriptures here. So what we have is a word. I would imagine that the verb itself gets used fairly often. Let's check that out. Dry land, leva yasa. So, like, for example, yabash has 14 occurrences, but then let's look up the word for yabesh, which is the verb. The verb has 73, which is more. It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's definitely more. But look at some of the places it. You know what I wonder too is that would be amazing if that had Psalm, Jeremiah. Tell me that it's the word for Ezekiel. That would be so cool. Yeah, so like Lamentations, on their bones it is withered. Yeah. So it's the word for our bones are dried up and our hope. Yeah, so like it's not every word for dry bones, but it seems to be so there's this section in Ezekiel 37 when it seems like then God he explains the metaphor, and then he says, well, the whole tribe of Israel is saying our bones are dried up, right? And it's the yabash word. It's the word that's almost entirely used for drying up the Red Sea. So it's weird how this word that is one that's reserved for triumph, because that's what it is. So like drying up the Red Sea is a story of triumph for God, and it's associated with this word. But then it's used in a negative way as well, which makes sense. I mean, it is the word literally to dry up or to wither, but it's used in a lot of really crazy places, especially like this idea of Ezekiel's bones being dried up. I mean, there's a doctoral thesis in there somewhere. I don't know. But the noun version, dry land, dry ground, every one of these instances, except for 3, have to do with the Red Sea. So this is going to get you. This is going to be fun. You're going to like this. So both the references when God makes dry land appear in the creation narrative, same word as when God makes dry land appear in the Red Sea. Isn't that great? Like this idea that God makes dry land appear and it's provision. Because can humans live in a roiling sea? Right? Like, can we spend our whole lives just swimming around? No, we need dry land to live on. And so God provides at the beginning in creation with dry land for us to live on. And then when we're stuck between literally a rock and a hard place, he provides dry land again. It's like it's his thing. It's his miracle. He's good at it, making dry land appear. So that's cool. The only other references that use yabash here, maybe should I translate it right? Yabasha. I'm sorry. Yabasha, I think. Yeah, Yabasha is when they're looking backwards and talking about the Red Sea account. So the only places it really gets talked about, I don't know if you track with me, is the Red Sea, or when people are in the future referring back to the event of the Red Sea, or the Lord raising dry land out of the waters in creation. That's a pretty cool area. And it's really important, right? So it's a really common miracle the Old Testament calls upon to talk about God's amazing works, right? So dry land, the sea, and then through the river they went on foot. You're probably wondering what's this referring to, and actually, if you remember, it's we don't talk about it a lot, but it's there. Um, I was hoping they had the reference in here. I bet you that, you know what, I'll bet you bottom dollar they've got it in the apparatus here. 6, yeah, Joshua chapter 3 verses 14 through 17. If you want to take a look at it later, or if you want to take a look at it now. In the book of Joshua, there Moses dies before they go into the promised land. They're on the eastern side of the Jordan, waiting to go into the promised land. Moses passes away, they bury him, that whole thing. Joshua takes over, and the Jordan River is at flood stage. It's very full, it's very dangerous, fast running, and as the Ark of the Covenant, it marches in front of the people. The whole people are marching, into the Promised Land. As the Ark of the Covenant goes forward, they step into the Jordan, and the Jordan stops. Then there's like this little editorial note that's really interesting, where it says it backed up all the way up to a city way up north of, because the river Jordan runs north to south. So there's a river way up north that the water backed up so badly that it kind of caused some flooding in that town way up north, because God stopped the water so they could all walk across on dry ground. So God does this dry ground miracle twice, at the Red Sea and then here at the River Jordan. So that's what it's referring to here. There we will rejoice in him. So there could be metaphorical, right? Oh, no. There did we rejoice in him. This must be call and that's funny. I didn't think that. So this is call imperfect. I always thought that imperfect was either present tense or could be a past or a future tense. But I've never seen it translated past tense, and that's what the ESV does. It says, there did we rejoice in him, like kind of talking about that we did it then. This is there's probably some kind of translational thing I'm missing here, a deep level grammar thing that I don't know about, but it makes sense in terms of the context, because if you remember the story, immediately after the crossing of the Red Sea, the people sit down and they sing. And so that would, make sense. Like they literally rejoice at the edge of the sea as like bodies were floating up from the Red Sea, as it says the bodies are like washing ashore, people who had been killed, the Egyptians, and they were celebrating that they had gotten victory over their enemies, right? So there we will rejoice. So maybe it's the idea just that maybe it's something we can learn, that when God gives victory, there is the place. That's the time to rejoice in him. And perhaps there are times where, that we're sitting in the medical room, the doctor comes in, this is a hospital room, and he tells us news of great joy, of victory, and we shouldn't wait till we get home to praise him, where it's safe. We should praise him right there and then. Yeah. Finally, verse 7, our last verse for today. Mosel, Big Burato Olam, Ena Bagoyim, Tispena Hasarim, Al Yarimu, Lamo Salah. So again, we have just the Salah there. He rules by his power forever. Olam, forever. His eyes, the nations. I think it's something like his eyes observe the rebellious nations. What do they have here? He rules by his might forever, whose eyes keep watching the nations. Okay, yeah. So it's talking about it. So in other words, the focus is still on God. So he rules by his power forever. His eyes, God's eyes, observe the nations. In other words, um, the nations would give a sense of like a large scale. The whole world. The nations would be everyone, right? So in other words, his eyes are on everyone. He watches everybody. He sees everything. He knows how many hairs on your head, but he also knows every single person in the world who has ever lived and ever will live, right? So his eyes are on the nations. Um, Something like he observes the rebellious so they do not exalt themselves. Okay, so they're putting observe with the nations here instead of observe with rebellious. So his eyes observe the nations, let not the rebellious exalt themselves. Something like that. So maybe the verse 7 could be it's one of those really cool moments where God speaks and it's both law and gospel at the same time. As a person of faith and as a God's child, when we hear that his eyes are upon us forever, that's a happy thing. We're not afraid of that. But on the flip side, right, the nations who are practicing evil, going after other gods, they should be concerned about that. That there's not a place they can hide from his vision, right? So, so in other words, the goyim, the nations, the ones opposed to God, probably in this context, um, they shouldn't go about exalting themselves because God sees everything they do. Almost sounds like maybe we could even drop in here the idea of the Tower of Babel, right? Like they're going to build this. God says, spread out. Don't gravitate towards one place, and they do exactly the opposite. They go to one place. They say, let us build a tower to heaven, and and um, and God sees everything. He sees it all, and then He deals with it, right? So don't think you can exalt yourselves and get away with it. So there we are. Nice verse, nice set of verses today. Psalm 66, nice psalm, and definitely reiterates something I've said many times that the Exodus is the gospel, is what the psalmist will kind of use as gospel joy in the Psalms. They'll refer back to the crossing of the Red Sea. This is the gospel, the crossing of the Red Sea for ancient Israel. The Lord bless you and keep you this day. Hope you have a fine weekend and enjoy the cool and crisp fall weather. God's blessings.